Hi there, my name is Ellen Mauro, and I am just down the street from where yesterday's terror attack here in Lower Manhattan finished. Just down the street from where that Home Depot rental van careened into that bike path, injuring and killing 8 people, pedestrians, cyclists. Really a terrible attack here in Manhattan yesterday afternoon. Now we are taking your questions live here on Facebook, so please put them in the comment section below. We would be very happy to hear from you and to answer any questions you might have about what happened here yesterday afternoon. Now, just to go through what happened here, this attack took place in the middle of the afternoon yesterday around 2 p.m. That rental car was rented in New Jersey. It arrived here in New York City later that hour. The driver then driving down a street in Lower Manhattan, hopping a curb onto a bike path, again targeting cyclists and pedestrians before ramming into a school bus. And I can tell you that that Home Depot truck was just down the street from me all day as forensic investigators poured over the scene looking for any clues. It's only been removed from the scene just a short time ago. So that gives you a sense that this is still very much an active investigation happening here. Now, in terms of the victims of yesterday's attack, 8 people were killed, 6 were pronounced dead here at the scene. 2 were pronounced dead later at hospital. 5 of the victims were here in New York City from Argentina. They were here for a school reunion, really such a happy occasion ending so tragically for them yesterday. One of the other dead is a Belgian woman, and the 2 other victims are American. Now, important to point out that authorities are saying that this investigation is still in its infancy. So some of the information that we conveyed to you here, it's what has been reported to us, but it could change in the coming days as this investigation continues. And again, we are taking your questions below the video, so please pop them into the comment section and we would be very happy to hear from you. And we are hearing from a man named Randy Johnson. Thank you so much for your question, Randy. Asking what are they searching for? Now, in terms of what they're searching for at the scene, it's extremely important for investigators to really piece together a second-by-second picture of what happened here in Lower Manhattan yesterday afternoon. So, as you can probably tell, we're just a few meters from the edge of the police cordon. So throughout the day, we've seen forensic investigators down the street behind me pouring over the ground, looking for any fragments of any of the bicycles that were caught up in this attack, analyzing the truck itself, really looking for any clues just to be able to, again, put together that second-by-second picture that's so important for investigators. But we can tell you some of what has been found. Now, we know that the attacker had what basically amounted to imitation firearms. When he came out of his truck yesterday after the attack, people thought that he had guns. That didn't turn out to be the case, but what authorities said today was that there were multiple knives recovered at the scene, as well as handwritten notes in Arabic saying that this attack was done in the name of ISIS. Now we have another question from V. Gerbrand, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Is this sufficient for the current leader of the U.S. to lump so many in the same box? And that, I'm assuming that's a question regarding how President Trump has reacted to this event today. We have seen him react on Twitter. We've seen him react in comments from the White House as well. And he's had a very political reaction, talking about the need for extreme vetting, saying that he would consider wanting to send this suspect to Guantanamo Bay after this attack. Now, of course, we know taking a hard line on immigration is something that we've heard Donald Trump do time and time again in the past. The suspect is originally from Uzbekistan. Authorities say he's been living here in the United States since March 2010, living here as a legal permanent resident. So We've seen the White House really kind of glom onto this immigration issue today as a result of this attack. Now, that's not a surprise, but why it's getting a lot of attention is because it's certainly a very political reaction, and we've had political opponents from the president criticize the fact that he is bringing politics into this so soon after the attack itself. For its defense, the White House says these are issues that Donald Trump talks about all the time, but this reaction is much different than the reaction we saw from the president, for example, after the Las Vegas shooting early in October. Now, that shooting was the deadliest in modern U.S. history, but we did not see a political reaction from the president. Instead, he said, "Oh, I'm not going to get into the politics of any of this." So he is drawing criticism today for being so willing to jump into politics on certain issues, but not on other ones. A question from Jason J. McBride. Talking about motive, the motive is pretty clear when the attacker is yelling Allahu Akbar while running down people. What other evidence is required? Now, Jason is referring to some reports in U.S. media that witnesses said that this attacker was yelling "God is great" in Arabic after the attack. Now, we didn't have the authorities confirm that today, but again, they did say that there were notes found referring to ISIS, so that is the motive they're exploring as well. They say that this is a terror attack, so that is the motive that is being worked on. Roxanne Carter. Did security find more details regarding the background and motive of the Home Depot truck? I'm assuming you're referring to the driver of the Home Depot truck. This was a rental truck from Home Depot. And yeah, we are learning more about the suspect, Roxanne, a man named Saifullah Saipov. Now, security officials again are saying that it appears that he had been planning this attack for weeks, according to the evidence that they have. Again, there were these notes referring to ISIS found near the scene, and there were also questions given that ISIS link of whether or not authorities were aware of this man previously. Now, the law enforcement officials were asked that today, whether this man was the target of any kind of counter-terror investigations himself. They said that no, he wasn't, but it does appear that he did have links to others who were targeted in such investigations. So there's obviously a lot more to come on the background of this man, and we know investigators are going to be spending the coming days. In fact, they're already doing this since the attack happened, speaking to his family members, to his contacts, trying to really put together a sense of what this man was up to in the last few weeks. Goku-san asks, who did this? Who was the driver? Goku, we can tell you again that the suspect in this attack is a man named Saifullah Saipov, a 29-year-old man from Uzbekistan who came to the U.S. With legal permanent resident status after landing. He's lived in the U.S. since March 2012, or 2010 rather. Authorities say they believe he became radicalized after he arrived here in the U.S., and they say that he was planning yesterday's attack, it would appear, according to the evidence that they have, for at least several weeks. What happened to the driver? Any possible or known accomplices? Is a question from Jason Okazaki. Well, the driver yesterday, after the attack happened, and again, what happened in the attack was you had the driver come into Lower Manhattan. He hopped a curb on a bike lane, careened this rental truck from Home Depot down this bike lane, targeting pedestrians, targeting cyclists, killing 8 people, injuring many more, and he after that happened, he got out of the car. There's video of him sort of running around and yelling, and there were a lot of 911 calls after this happened. So police converged on the scene. They engaged the suspect. He was shot in the abdomen and brought to hospital, where as far as we know, according to the last update, he remains. So obviously officials will be very keen to speak further to him to see what information he might provide to them for this investigation, but we don't have a sense of whether or not they have really been able to speak to him given his injuries, or whether or not he's cooperating. In terms of any possible or known accomplices, authorities say that he does appear to be a lone wolf inspired by ISIS, but it also appears that he does have possible links to others who have been the target of counterterrorism investigations in the past. So that will all be a major part of this investigation as authorities try to really put together a picture of who this man is. Lucy J. Anderson, why fake guns? Well, that is an open question. Obviously, this attacker wanted to create fear and terror in the people caught up in this attack. Now, we don't know if there was an attempt to buy real guns or not. We just don't have that information. It's being reported that the two weapons that he had were a paintball gun and a pellet gun, and when he came out of the vehicle with these weapons, people thought they were real firearms. So those were recovered at the scene, as well as I say, several knives in the rental truck as well. A viewer on YouTube, we're also simulcasting this on YouTube, wants to know more about the victims and the numbers of dead and injured. So again, some of these numbers have changed since this story first broke, but what we're hearing from authorities is that 8 people were killed and around a dozen injured. Now 6 people died at the scene yesterday. 2 were pronounced dead later in hospital. And in terms of what we know of the victims, 5 of them were a part of a group of friends visiting New York City from Argentina. They were here celebrating a high school reunion, the 30th anniversary of graduating high school, something that they would have these gatherings every once in a while to celebrate. So such a tragic ending to that reunion of friends here in New York City. Another one of the dead was a woman from Belgium. Her husband put out a really touching statement talking about her life and how much she'll be missed. And the other 2 people who died in the attack are American, and we're waiting more information on their identities. Now, beyond that, there were around a dozen people injured, and police earlier today said that 9 of the injured were still in hospital, 3 of them in critical condition. Now, that was from a press conference that happened around 11 a.m., so that information could have changed, but that is the latest update we have in terms of the injured. Beth Rebstock asks, how did this happen when New York City has barriers? Well, Beth, I personally, we haven't been able to actually get to where this bike path was that he got up onto yesterday when he was driving through Lower Manhattan. So I can't confirm or deny whether there are barriers at that particular path. The fact that he was able to get up on it and drive for block after block after block suggests that there wasn't. Now, certainly there are barriers in some parts of New York City. There are barriers in some parts of Times Square, for example. But that the fact that these attacks happen shows that they're just really, really hard to stop, these kinds of attacks. We've seen them happen in Nice, in London, in Berlin, in Barcelona. These are very soft targets, people on a sidewalk, and it's not hard to rent a truck. So that's what makes these attacks so dangerous. And we know ISIS has directed its followers to launch these kinds of improvised attacks in Western cities. And again, they're notoriously hard to stop. Nico Kitty asks, did this happen in the Central Park area? Actually, we are at the other end of Manhattan from Central Park. I don't know if we're able to pan up to, this might be too far of a pan, but up to the Freedom Tower. I'm asking a lot of my camera woman right now, but you can see we're just almost in the shadow of the Freedom Tower, the old the World Trade Center site. So we're just a few blocks away from the World Trade Center, the Freedom Tower in Lower Manhattan. So quite a number of blocks away from Central Park. Now, again, we are taking your questions. We're broadcasting here on Facebook as well as on YouTube. Now, one thing we haven't really talked too much about, and it's an important part of this story, is how the mood is in New York City after this attack. Obviously, New York City being a place that has had its fair share of difficult days. Now, we arrived in New York City just after midnight last night, so about 7 hours or so after the attack happened. And we did see a lot of police officers on the streets when we got here, but we also saw a lot of people, big crowds out celebrating Halloween, and really showing a sense of defiance and a willingness to not be cowed by what happened here earlier in the day. And throughout the day, as normal as a day as it can be, that's what we've seen here in Manhattan. Busy sidewalks, people going about their day-to-day business. There's a school beside me. It's full of kids. Throughout the day, they've been out at recess, lots of parents dropping their kids off. There's no sense of this having any kind of major impact on life here in New York City. New Yorkers just kind of getting back to business as usual as much as they can. But law enforcement officials say there will be a heightened police presence across the city over the coming days at train stations, at airports, at big gathering places. Now, this isn't in response to a credible possible looming threat, but authorities are saying they're doing it as a precautionary measure and to reassure the public. One other thing to point out is that the New York City Marathon is happening this weekend. It will go ahead, as the governor of New York said today. New York goes on, but of course there will be heightened security. Another question from Usman Panu asking, how can we prevent these attacks? Well, the fact that we've seen so many of this style of attack shows how difficult they are to prevent. We've seen this kind of attack in Nice, in Berlin, in London, in Barcelona. It's just we've seen it happen over and over and over again, and that's because a sidewalk full of people in a busy Western city is a soft target, and it's very hard to protect that kind of target. And of course, it's not all that difficult to rent a van. Now, we have in some areas of some big cities seen barricades erected or barriers put up along central sidewalks as a way of trying to prevent these attacks. There are some barriers like that in parts of Times Square, but law enforcement officials will say you can't put a barrier like that on every sidewalk in every major city. So these are attacks that are notoriously hard to prevent, and we've seen ISIS really exploit that over the past few years in instructing its followers to conduct these very kind of improvised attacks in Western cities. I think we are done taking questions, so I'll just wrap up again by saying thank you so much for watching this and for the questions that were submitted. And again, the investigation continues on what happened here in Lower Manhattan yesterday afternoon.